And welcome live into the latest edition of the Unpaid Interns. Austin Render joined by Connor Hines. Monday, June 15th. Connor, we're halfway through the month of June. I hope everything's well on your end. Sports are starting to at least give us plenty to talk about. They're not
Yep.
Some sports are back: NASCAR, golf, I think some horse racing, soccer. But the other sports that are in the process of coming back are certainly not lacking drama.
Yeah, this is very true. At the very least, we have headlines. We have things to talk about now, and that's not something we could have said a month ago. But, I think today's show is going to give us some interesting perspective. As always, you've been killing it with the guests, Austin, but today in particular, because we have two guests on who cover two sports that honestly haven't gotten maybe the attention that they deserve to receive. But in my opinion, these two sports, and I'll let you introduce our guys today. I mean, if we're going to get sports back this summer, I mean, we've already got golf back and then the NHL as well. I mean, looks a lot more promising at the moment in comparison to some other things that are dominating, media headlines like the NBA, which we'll get into some more today.
Yeah, let's talk NBA before we get too into our guests. Let's go through a few of today's headlines. The biggest headline, I think, is probably the NBA and what is going on. I think you could go about 50-50 with the NBA and the MLB in terms of biggest headlines, and neither one of them is pro playing sports right now. The NBA has a lot of players spearheaded by Kyrie Irving who are not even sure would play if the NBA came back. But nonetheless, Kyrie Irving is leading the charge to not have the NBA season. Apparently, when the deal was signed by the NBA Players Association, they signed a deal that we agree to play again and to resume, but we don't agree to all the minor details yet. And those still need to be negotiated, which is kind of something that we as the public didn't realize when all that was going down. So what are your thoughts to what's going on? Kyrie Irving doesn't want to play because he doesn't feel it's right to the movement in the country right now. A lot of players have backed him: Dwight Howard, Steven Jackson, Carmelo Anthony. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the first time we mentioned it might have been last week or maybe even the week before when Kevin Durant came out and said something. And look, at this time in our country, in our world, whatever it may be, you have to respect and understand where they're coming from. There's no other option. Where, Kyrie and Katie and all these guys are coming from, it completely makes sense. As far as getting the rest of the season to happen without these guys, regardless of, who wants to play, who doesn't want to play. And I've said this before, you just have to accept the fact that the rest of the NBA season, if it gets resumed, is just going to look different. It's just going to be different. And there are guys who are just going to choose not to play. And yeah, they have the right to do that. Yeah, that's part of the deal. That's part of the program. Especially with all these, new terms and new negotiations and new deals happening. So, you have to accept that it looks different. I've heard a lot of pundits personally say that, whether they be black, white, Latino, or anything else, a lot of people across the board have seemed to think that it is a good idea for sports to come back in terms of a, act of healing and trying to get everybody back on the same page, without taking attention away from the movement that's taking place in our country right now, and perhaps even giving athletes more of a platform than before, in a playing atmosphere, in a game atmosphere, to continue to draw attention to this movement and, the important things about it and all of that.
I think they could play hand in hand, though.
Absolutely.
Coming back and the movement, uniting our country. What better to unite our country than sports?
Completely agreed. Where I get concerned, though, is where I start reading headlines comparing the NBA to the situation we're seeing with baseball right now in terms of, just a constant, war of the minds. If you don't agree on anything between the players and the owners and the like, you're not going to get a season regardless of whatever else is going on. And the NBA has always prided itself on, being a players first league and having a strong working relationship between the team management and the players. And suddenly we're being told otherwise.
Yeah, the NBA is going to be something to watch. Kyle Kuzma's come out and he said that he wants to play. A lot will hinge on what LeBron James says. Because if LeBron James is going to play, I mean, that's like if Michael Jordan in the 90s, when he says he's going to play, everyone around him is going to play. And when you think about the people that have come out and said they're not going to play, Kyrie Irving is hurt. Well, he was hurt. We don't know if he was going to play, if he's healthy enough. Dwight Howard is a player that the Lakers could probably win a championship if he's not there. Like, no disrespect to Dwight Howard. And I'm with you. You cannot fault anyone for doing what they feel is best in this movement. But I think even if these players sit out, the NBA will continue on, and some of these teams will still be okay, even if they don't have some of their role players. Let's shift to the MLB, like you said, before we get to our guests, who are going to talk about the NHL and golf. So let's talk MLB a little bit. It's chaos, Connor. I don't foresee anything happening. It feels like the owners are just trying to get the smallest amount of games for the prorated salaries. The players are just annoyed. Where is this going? Are we going to have baseball?
I think it's time for me to turn on tweet notifications for Jeff Passan, because it seems like literally every hour it's something else that's just like even more heartbreaking and even more negative. But I think for the most part, I mean, you summed it up right there. I mean, there are so many numbers being tossed around right now that it's hard for a guy like Jeff Passan to even follow, let alone, baseball fans. And I think it's ironic in terms of like the sports media landscape that we just had this Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire 30 for 30 air last night on ESPN. And suddenly that's drawn so much attention in the sports media world back to talking about baseball all of a sudden. Whereas, if you're talking about baseball, you should be talking about this right now, and the fact that we might not have a baseball season at all. And that's looking increasingly more likely. And I mean, I've said this before on this Unpaid Interns show. There's nothing worse that could come about for baseball right now. I mean, you have trouble, gathering and, collecting momentum and interest for the game already. I mean, you're just doing yourself no favors. So you summed it up pretty well. It's just a constant disagreement, and it's sad to see.
Yeah, there's a lot going on right now, and it is.
I feel bad for the players signing right now, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's such an interesting part of it is the players who just got drafted. They're going to get signing bonuses, but they may not play a single game this year in the minor league. And we talked to Greg Murray about that last week on Wednesday, and he's like, look, I think the signing bonuses are going to be enough for the players to still join and still leave. Because I thought, what if these second, third rounders who are getting picked, who are underclassmen or juniors, it's like, why would you want to go into this messed up system right now? But a signing bonus of $1 million or whatever it may be might be enough. A couple $100,000 might be enough for them to say, look, I can get through this 1 year and then hopefully I'll get some reps next year. I don't know. But I think it will change a little bit of who stays, who goes type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're waiting on our first guest here, Scott Powers. He's just joined the chat here, so let's go ahead and bring him in. It is 11:10. Time to shift gears here to Scott. Scott, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a lot of negative talk right now about the MLB and the NBA. The NHL is kind of sliding under the radar, I think, right now. What are your thoughts of what's going on just in general in the sports world?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of uncertainty even with the NHL. I know that they're further ahead a little bit in the planning, and I know that they're hopeful to have training camp next month. And get a season going at some point in August. But we were on a conference call with the Blackhawks just last week, and Patrick Kane, said kind of pump the brakes on that a little bit, and just things still have to be voted upon among the players, and I think there's a lot of concerns about safety, and it's probably not so much the financial aspect of the NHL, compared to at least the baseball. So I think that's it's at least the hurdles they're not going to have to worry about. But I think a lot of concerns about how long people are going to be away from their families, what the bubbles look like, what life looks like inside those bubbles. If something happens, someone gets infected, does this league shut down? I talked to Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot this past weekend about it as well, and she thought a lot of those things are things they're having negotiations with possible hub cities, and the fact that Chicago is the rate of the virus has certainly decreased over the last few weeks. That Chicago would be a possible hub city, and something they're hopeful about. But I think there's some optimism, at least from a league wide, that NHL will get rolling again here again. But I think the players are, there are a lot of things to discuss in the coming weeks, and whether it actually happens, we'll see.
Well, you cover the Blackhawks for The Athletic, and I know that some of your months here, May, March, April, would have been different than it was now. What would a normal spring have looked like for you, and what have you tried to kind of fill that void with?
Yeah, well, the season wouldn't have rolled until at least April. It didn't look like the Blackhawks were going to get in the playoffs, so it probably would have been another long off season. Kind of preparing for the draft. You take some downtime. I guess there could have been changes, maybe a general manager, coach, who knows? Like you just don't know. I mean, the Blackhawks hadn't been in the playoffs since 2015, so after since this pause, the Blackhawks have fired their president, so there could have certainly been other changes too. So you kind of go into that coverage, and you definitely take a step back a little bit, and it's a long grind of the season. But now it's been interesting. The Blackhawks. Last week was their first access in 3 months, so we've been there's two of us on the beat. It's Mark Lazarus and I, and we're just been kind of grinding it out and trying to do a lot of enterprise writing and trying to figure out some features, and certainly taking advantage of the Blackhawks. It's been a 10-year anniversary since their 2010 Cup, so we've written a lot around that, and but yeah, we've been producing I think 20 stories a month between probably a little bit more between the two of us, and just we've both been on the beat for a while, so we have some knowledge of it. So I think that's helped. But it's been an interesting time, I'm sure, for all of us, and just trying to, especially with the sports only website and the Athletic, where I think around Chicago, you've seen other media outlets kind of take a step back. Chicago Tribune especially, not even having the sports section be at the back of the paper. We've seen some of those things happen, and with us, we don't have that the luxury of kind of relying more on the news side. So it's been having to continue to produce, and obviously the Athletic's been affected, like a lot of media organizations, with some cuts. Laid some people off, and certainly some financial cuts. So I think we're all feeling it in that way, and just trying to get by, and hopefully sports come back sooner than later.
And Scott, kind of to a point you made there, the Chicago Blackhawks probably would not still be in quote unquote playoff contention if we were, in a normal season. Currently at 32-48, I believe they snagged that last playoff spot, if you will. Obviously there's criticism about the NHL plan right now, but at the same time, the NHL is a league that at least has a plan going forward. Are there mixed emotions from media members, fans in general, about Chicago being included at all? Is it a weird feeling that you're still gearing up to maybe cover some more games here?
Yeah, I think that's there wasn't a perfect scenario, and I think the Blackhawks sort of realized that they probably weren't going to get in, and the odds were against them, and I'm sure some NHL teams are frustrated by this format, but at the end of the day, there wasn't going to be something that was perfect, and I think the NHL wanted to include as many teams that were near the playoffs as possible. The Blackhawks odds were pretty slim, but there was a chance, and I think it also benefits the league to have more teams in this play-in format. From they're certainly going to be relying on advertising money here, and from television and television audiences. So I think they wanted to get as many teams in there as possible too, just because you're not going to have fans of these games. So and even now as a reporter, I don't know how I'll be covering these games. I'd sort of be surprised if media is actually allowed in there, or maybe we're allowed in and we're very far away and then do Zoom calls afterward. And I don't even know if financially it's going to make sense for a media organization to be sending reporters across the country or wherever if the access isn't like it is usually. So usually you're there for morning skates and you're interviewing players and coaches in an open locker room, and post game is very much the same too. So it's a different world. And so even now, like I'm getting ready and preparing to cover possible playoffs in July, August, but I don't know if I'm going to be there or not, or what that's going to look like. So I think there are a lot of uncertainties, even from the players and the teams, but also from the media and the fans too. I mean, it's especially hockey, and I think the Blackhawks in the city where it's such an event to go to a bar and watch the game, and people who don't even watch hockey get together and party. And that's just probably not going to be a reality in a few months. I mean, even with a team that wins the Stanley Cup and whenever it is August or September, what's a parade look like, or for any of these things? It's a different world with the virus and people having this social distance. So I get this, and I think the Blackhawks get it too. Why some people would be frustrated or upset with the Blackhawks on playoffs, but it is what it is, and I think people are just kind of moving on and hoping for some hockey.
Well, you mentioned it. I mean, Chicago obviously loves the Blackhawks, and a lot of people there's a lot of casual hockey fans that get sucked in for the playoffs because there's something special about the NHL playoffs. What is it in your mind that makes the playoffs for the NHL so unique, so special, that makes even non-hockey fans kind of sucked in and they want to watch it?
Well, I think the big part is it's just the unknown. It's unlike the NBA and in some sports. I think hockey, the best team doesn't always win. And that's also kind of a frustrating aspect of hockey, is where you play 82 games and you're the best team, and you can be like the Tampa Bay Lightning of last season, where you're one of the best teams ever in the regular season, and then you get knocked out in the first round by the Columbus Blue Jackets. So I think the fact that hockey is unpredictable and it's a bouncing puck, and a hot goalie, or it's whatever, and there's so much on the line, and usually those games are so decided by a goal or two, and it can often be just by chance a team wins. So I think all those aspects, and you throw in the physical element, and I think teams are playing a little bit more cleaner during the playoffs, and referees sometimes, maybe it's not even cleaner, but the referees are just swallowing their whistles a little bit too. So games kind of played openly and freely, and I think a lot of those aspects. But I think for just the idea, if you can get in, you can win it. If you're an 8 seed, and we've seen it before, it doesn't happen all the time, but if you're an 8 seed, you get in, you can win a cup. So I think there's that element of just uncertainty and anything can happen. So I honestly wasn't a hockey fan until I started covering it. I was sort of thrown on the beat by ESPN, even knowing that I wasn't a huge hockey fan, and I've embraced the sport and certainly appreciate it now more than when I did growing up.
We mentioned how the NBA might be the NHL might be in a bit of a better position in comparison to other leagues like the NBA right now, in terms of actually getting back on the ice and actually finishing the playoffs. At the same time, though, a massive percentage of these players in the NHL come from overseas, and there are so many logistical things that still need to be taken care of, still need to be worked out. Like anything else in the world right now, you've talked a lot about the uncertainty. I mean, some NBA players are saying they're just not going to play even if there is a season that comes back. Are you seeing any similar conversation, any similar sort of talk in the NHL? Does it seem pretty certain to you that they're going to get on the ice if they're able to? Where does everything stand? Because I know before you came on, Austin and I were talking a little bit about it. Suddenly the NBA doesn't look all that, certain for this Orlando plan.
Yeah, I think the next few weeks are huge because I think right now it's been the NHL talking a lot, and the NHL obviously wants this to go ahead. But now it's a chance for the players to speak and have their opinions heard, and certainly have more of a dialogue with the league. So I think if there are concerns, and I imagine that there are some people, I think there's some players who have voiced it through the media in the recent weeks, talking about how what's this look like? How long is it? How long are we away from our families? How what do these communities look like? What are the actual details? Because I think it's been very general, and it's very much been the league driving this conversation. So as much as the NBA looked good a few weeks ago, I think the NHL is sort of going to hit hit its brink here, and whether it goes ahead or not. And then even now, as we've seen in certain areas of the country where the virus is returning, and there's spikes. I think that's something too. I think those are all going to be all considerations of the league and the player. Like how safe can you make us? How much of a bubble do we have? And certainly those concerns of even logistics of getting players back from Russia, throughout the world, and certainly the Canadian and the U.S. border needs to open too. And so I think there are a lot of specifics that need to be ironed out here in the next few weeks. We're talking, we're June 15th today, and basically a month from now, they like to open training camp, and you certainly need to have people quarantine if they're returning from different countries and having everyone safe. And then if you're talking about starting the season in August, what's that look like? And especially going into the fall too, I think there's an unknown of a second wave, and as people get the flu, and I'm sure we're all going to be scared. We all come down with the flu, and whether it's COVID or not, I think there's going to be a lot of just a lot of unknowns and concerns. And I think I think what we know today isn't what we'll be knowing in a few weeks or a month from now, and it has to go with the league too. And whatever confidence or optimism today, it could be shot within a week. So I think there's guarded optimism within the league and even the players as this returns, but it could all be different, a few weeks from now.
Well, you mentioned Chicago possibly being a hub city. We've heard Vegas as well. What are some of the cities leading the charge in terms of a potential hub city for the playoffs?
Yeah, I know the Athletic reported that Vegas was a front runner. I think, and that's been elsewhere. It kind of depends on whether the Canadian border opens, and I think those cities would certainly be in the conversation. Talking to the mayor, it seems like Chicago's still in there as well, and the fact the numbers have dropped is key, and the fact that Chicago has high-end hotels that are connected to a lot of entertainment and restaurants, and you keep players within that bubble. If they can stay in a hotel and go to multiple restaurants and have a movie theater or a bowling alley or whatever, I think those things will be key too, because these people are gonna have to stay within that bubble for weeks at a time, possibly. So I think Chicago will be considered as long as the numbers stay where they are. I've seen Pittsburgh and some others, but it sounds like the NHL, PA, the union of the players, are going to have more of a discussion this week and start getting into the nitty gritty of what cities make sense. But I would think Chicago is considered just because it's somewhat easy to get to, just transportation wise, and then because of the amenities and what it can offer. And the fact that the virus has seen a decrease, where a few weeks ago it was around 1,000 plus cases a day within the state, and now we're finally seeing those numbers get underneath that. So it sounds like decisions will be made in the near future, but Vegas sounds like one of the front runners, at least for now.
How many are they going to have, hub cities?
It sounds like two cities, and so you'll have and there's also been talks of Chicago was hosting it, whether Chicago would actually play here. They wouldn't want to probably. That's one thing that they're also trying to figure out too, is whether to keep the host city within there, or if that's too much of an advantage. So it's possible there could be games to be playing here, but Chicago could be in Vegas too, if that's the case. So I think the NHL is just trying to figure out what makes sense too, and ideally they probably have a Western Conference and Eastern Conference city. But again, with the Canadian border being closed right now between the U.S., that's kind of also a hurdle with this.
Now, you've covered, like you said, you've been around the Chicago beat for a while. I mean, this is a team that before 2015 had a ton of success year after year. What are some of your fondest memories of covering this Blackhawks team and just being a member of the Blackhawks media?
Yeah, I came on the beat in 2013 in the lockout year. I'd covered high school and colleges for ESPN before that, for ESPN Chicago, and got thrown on the beat in 13. So it all happened pretty quickly with them. Was it 24 games in a row? They were unbeaten, or it was over 24 consecutive games with a point, and they go on to become President's Trophy winners that year and roll the cup, and you have the 2 goals in 17 seconds in Boston, and it's just it was kind of a blur. It was sorry about that. Bit of a everything happened so fast, and the fact that I wasn't really much of a hockey fan that first season and got thrown on the beat was probably wasn't the happiest season, even as the Blackhawks were winning, and I was getting to write big stories for ESPN. But I sort of embraced it after that, and having to cover another Cup in 15 was really cool. And I grew up in Chicago, but was never a hockey fan or a Blackhawks fan, so I've been able to stay pretty objective throughout this. So whether Blackhawks win or lose, I'm gonna write a story. But it's cooler covering the big events, and certainly covering Stanley Cups is interesting. But it's definitely been kind of a different journey where I never thought I'd be a hockey reporter, and here I am, 7 years into covering the Blackhawks, and probably gonna be a hockey reporter the rest of my career. So it's been an interesting trip.
Well, how would you, if there's somebody, because this happens to plenty of people, you grow up wanting one sport and you get another. What's your recommendation to someone in this business who gets thrown into a beat like hockey? Maybe they're not a fan, or soccer, or whatever sport they're not a fan of. What's your recommendation to young media members when they're not ready for that sport? How can they become ready like you did?
Well, I think the first, a lot of it comes down to telling stories. So I think, your interview skills and all those things are key to finding good stories as you learn about the sport. That first year, 2013, I'm sort of embarrassed what my hockey knowledge was. I really didn't know much. So, where I am now is obviously in a different place, but I sort of embraced it, and I had to, learn basic stuff really about forechecking and backchecking, and really the basics of hockey, and then at some point embracing analytics and understanding the game at a higher level. But that first year, it was sort of dictated by what the stories were, and the fact the Blackhawks were winning, that was really interesting. But also, they're coming off the lockout, and the fact that Blackhawks had success before, but we're coming off a couple seasons where they had been bounced from the playoffs too. So it was you have to know the story and sort of do your homework a little bit as you go. But I think a lot of I think a lot of us, if you learn the basic skills of journalism and reporting, that you can go out and cover a protest, or cover a hockey game, or cover a sport you don't know, where you certainly have to do a little bit of homework and educate yourself a little bit. But I think a lot of the basic skills of journalism and reporting will apply across the board as you do the job.
Well, that's great advice. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight on the Blackhawks, on the NHL, a league still trying to figure out its future here in 2020. But we appreciate you taking some time to talk to us. Best of luck, stay healthy, and hopefully we have some hockey soon.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
That was Scott Powers of The Athletic, who covers the Chicago Blackhawks. Connor, good insight there from him. Hockey seems to be on the right track, but like he said, still some work to be done. Let's bring in our next guest. He is from the podcast and the YouTube page No Laying Up. He's Chris Salmon. As you can see, he's a pro podcaster as well. He's got it decked out and ready to go. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hey, sorry to keep bumping you several different times, but thank you for having me.
You're a busy guy. That's all right. Kind of tell the audience, not everyone that watches and listens to us may know what you do. Kind of explain what No Laying Up is about, the podcast, the YouTube videos, all that stuff.
That's a unique flex there that, your show, you claim your show is more popular than ours. Like, I really like that.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
Relax. Not unlike you guys, I'm sure. I've always been a huge sports fan my whole life. And I kind of some friends and I set out to start we saw like a little revolution going in sports media in terms of people taking things into their own control and kind of starting their own blogs. And this was kind of before podcasts really became big, but some friends and I, we started our own like golf website really at the time that kind of more merged into a podcast and video network, but it just talked about golf maybe a bit more irreverently than most other people were talking about it on TV, and gave people kind of a different outlet, or hopefully the idea, the vibe is, you know, how you would talk about golf to your friends is how we talk about it on the airwaves. And it kind of took off in popularity, and we kind of did it on the side, spread out across multiple countries really for a few years, and decided to make it a full-time job about 3 years ago, I guess this month. And we are somehow able to make it a full-time job and do it successfully. And we pump out a couple podcasts a week, try to do at least a video a week, and try to at least bring a little bit of try to get rid of a little bit of the stuffy attitude that comes with the game of golf. And people seem to be into it, so we are going to keep pumping it out.
Well, tournament 1 is in the books, the Charles Schwab Challenge. We all just watched it yesterday. Pretty insane final day in terms of at least the 17th hole. What were your thoughts? Let's put golf aside. The tournament itself, the procedures, the social distancing. How did you feel all of that went? Obviously from a distance for you, but what did you think of the way the PGA Tour handled week 1?
Gosh, I forget how many pages the handbook or the guidelines or whatever the PGA Tour put together, but I have some doubts as to how well the players may have read it. But there is a protocol in place, and they have thought about a lot of things, and they have made an environment. They've done, I think they've realistically done everything they can to prevent something bad happening. I think it's pretty legit. Now, there was some policies that were supposed to be in place, such as caddies not touching the clubs and like wiping down the flags with hand sanitizer and stuff like that. I didn't see any of that. However, those are mostly for show, because every player and caddy that's on site has been tested multiple times. All tests came back negative. So in theory, it shouldn't really matter if they're touching the clubs and stuff like that. I don't know about you. I don't know how much you guys watched over the weekend, but I started kind of thinking about it. You know, I think once the players are safe and in that environment, in the bubble that they're calling it, they're supposed to be staying in special hotels, not going out to dinner, basically semi-quarantined while you're playing golf tournaments. And there's a special charter flight that everyone gets in and takes to the next event. It's, you know, if we're going to do sports over the next year and a half or whatever it is before we have a vaccine, that's what it's going to look like. It's interesting that if there is a positive test, that it does not mean the event is canceled. The PGA Tour might not even, they won't disclose whether or not a player tested positive. If a guy withdraws, he is probably going to want to say very specifically why he withdrew, or just come out and say, yeah, I tested positive for this. And I guess, like I said, it's about as good as they can do. It was exciting to watch sports on TV again. I appreciate the effort that they went to make it happen. And it would have been easy to sit back and let another sport go first. And they're not technically the first one, but of all the major sports, I know NASCAR has been back, but golf was one of the last ones to shut down. And I thought they would wait for MLB or NBA to come back, but they were a little bit more aggressive, and so far so good.
I mean, at least for me, golf is one of those sports that, you know, it just seemed more natural just because of the way it was set up and the way, you know, CBS put the production together. I know at least watching, you know, most of it on Saturday, I mean, it seemed pretty natural and put together, and it seemed pretty successful, all things considered. But, you know, talking about the golf specifically, this was a pretty awesome first tournament to get the PGA Tour back on the mat. What surprised you? You know, what was maybe the biggest disappointment? I mean, this was a pretty strong, pretty promising setup for the rest of the summer.
Yeah, so what made this tournament unique is with 3 months of tournaments getting canceled, a lot of the top players who they take they're very particular about what events they want to play, especially the guys that hit it really far. So an event like the Charles Schwab Challenge at Colonial is likely to get bumped off their schedule. Rory doesn't play this event. Justin Thomas doesn't play this event. Dustin Johnson doesn't play this event because it's a golf course that you wouldn't think would fit their style. I mean, there's so many great events on the PGA Tour that you are looking for weeks to take off. Honestly, it's hard to do for some of these guys. They got to sit out some events that are really good events, really good fields, really good golf courses. But throw all that out the window. These guys haven't played in 3 months. Almost everyone came back for this. I think it was 37 of the top 50. Best field they've had at that course in forever. And what it did, this golf course, it does not eliminate anyone from the field. If you don't hit it far, you can compete with these guys on this golf course. So what you got is a very bunched leaderboard, many different playing styles involved at the top. A lot of the bombers and the top players did really well. So it was kind of tough to keep up with everything that was going on, but it delivered. I mean, it gave drama. There was ups and downs. There was heartbreak. There was birdies. There was some massively missed putts that, just kind of just felt like a knife stabbed in your gut. But, we saw a Jordan Spieth run that was crazy, that was up and down and it ended up fizzling out. Bryson DeChambeau packed on, I don't even know how many pounds during the quarantine, at least 30, I would say, and is just hitting it as far. He led the field in driving. He's cutting corners, hitting bombs. I don't even know what he looks like. I said something, it's hard to describe. He looks like the son of a mechanic who is now working for his dad in the summer, and he doesn't realize that he's now made a career-long choice. He's never going back to college. He's now a mechanic. He just looks dumpy and kind of silly, and it's so fun to watch. And that was the most exciting, I think, on my end, was watching Bryson try to cut the corners and just completely transform his game in the last 6 months and see it on full display.
Well, I feel obligated to ask. Austin and I were talking about this a little bit before the show started. We had this conversation about Zion, I feel like less than a year ago. Is Bryson fat?
I know that there is a ton of muscle there. So I'm not saying he just got fat. I think there is some – I don't even know if you call it fat. I mean, if you drink 5 to 6 protein shakes a day, and if that's like whey protein, that is just going to be fat. I think there's going to be some fat there.
Yeah.
There is some pictures that were floating around of when he goes and gets in his putting stance, that gut it's there. There's something spilling over the belt. Also, though, he's posted pictures on Instagram showing how many abs he has, trying to flex on Brooks Koepka for some reason. So I think there's both to it. He has cultivated a lot of mass. There is a ton of muscle under there. But there's also just a little bit of – I'm not even saying it's like pizza and beer and burgers. I just think if you're having that much whey protein and that many calories, there's going to be a little bit of – I don't want to call it fat on there, but there's a little bit of that there.
My favorite part, and that might have been because they didn't show him hitting many drives over the weekend, but just was this crazy putting stance where he just looks extremely – and he always looks uncomfortable, but he looks even more uncomfortable now. Morikawa, I mean, he's the guy that – even Nick Faldo said, I don't know much about him. But we do at this point. It's been a year, but he's still a young guy. As a golfer, I'm sure you've had stuff like that happen to you. Harsh lip outs, brutal misses on the 18th hole. He's going to be all right, though? I mean, what does his game give that's going to keep him around?
So he is already one of the best players in the world. And the way the official World Golf Rankings work, there's just kind of a little bit of a lag for new up-and-coming players. So how it works is basically you earn world ranking points. And no matter what, the minimum the points, the system is based on an average of the points you earn. And for young players, no matter how many events you play, your world ranking points gets divided by at least 40. That's the minimum divisor. So he hasn't played 40 professional events yet. He's earned this many points in only 21 events. So his world ranking is just hurting. If you look at the best golf that's been played over the last year or so, I always fall back on the Golf Week Sagarin rankings. He was 5th in the world, and basically a power rankings of golf, 5th best player in the world as of yesterday. And a second place finish is going to help that a lot as well. He is a premium ball striker. You're going to hear a ton about that, about how good his iron play is. Right now he's recorded one. I just saw Sean Martin tweeted something that if its season ended today, he would have the 7th best strokes gain approach season in the history of strokes gain, which goes back to 2003 or something like that. So guess who is in the top 5 seasons are all Tiger. Adam Scott's got a season up there, but that's how good he is with his irons. So he is going to be in contention a ton. There are some questions about his putting. We had a little long conversation about that last night on our podcast. Is it, does this create scar tissue, blah, blah, blah? I don't think it necessarily does. He's such a crazy young player. He's 23 years old. We come out and expect so much of these guys. He's already won once on tour, and he lost by 1 shot to Matt Wolff, who eagled the 18th hole last summer at the 3M, and now he's lost in a playoff. He could easily be a 3-time PGA Tour winner with basically a year of professional golf under his belt. So, yes, he's going to be fine. Bet on that guy. bet on him being on the U.S. Ryder Cup team at Whistling Straits this fall, 100%.
I thought I'd tee you up for a Sagarin ratings segment there. I know how much you love that. Obviously, let's branch away from the golf. You as a podcast get to talk to a lot of different people. You have relationships with a lot of different people, with Callaway, with the tour, with Charles Schwab, etc. How would you recommend a young journalist kind of coming into whatever sport it is? How do you best go about making connections with your fellow media members, with athletes? What's the best route to that in your mind?
Great question. It's a complicated one. I would say the advice I always give people, and people always reach out for advice, is one, I think we are incredibly lucky to be in the spot we're in, but I think we got really lucky. We worked really hard at it, but we got lucky in that we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what we were building, and all we did was work hard at it. If we would have set out to do what we currently do, I probably just would not have evolved that way. But we put our head down and we just said, like, we are going to make this about, I guess, let me rephrase that. I always tell people, if you want to make it in the sports world or something, you got to make, or really anything in business, make whoever would be the potential employer or whoever you're trying to impress, make them realize they need you. Not like it wouldn't be a great thing. A lot of people come to us and say, hey, I love golf. I would love to work for you. I'm like, okay, well, what does that do for me? Like, you haven't told me why you would be a great fit for us. So my advice to people is like, hey, go prove it. Like, you got to have a track record. So we got a big break when Rory McIlroy came on the podcast in 2016. What helped us is we had 55 previous episodes that not that many people were listening to, but we had done the work. The fact that not a lot of people were listening to it didn't turn us off from that. So when we get the new audience flow in at episode 56, we've got a backlog that says like, oh, I see they do recaps of the majors. Oh, I saw Charles Howell was on. I've never heard him talk. That kind of thing of you have to put your nose to the grind and really create something that's unique. It's different. There's a lot of copycats out there too. I mean, I'm not saying every golf podcast is copying us necessarily, but now there's 3 new golf podcasts every week. Now that people have seen the success of golf podcasts. So you have to do something that's unique. You have to provide something to the market that people can't get elsewhere. Otherwise, there's no necessarily any reason why people would gravitate towards your content or anything like that.
You mentioned having Rory on the show. You guys have landed a lot of big guys, of course, over the course of the podcast. Favorite memories from, talking about golf, favorite memories of, maybe hilarious guests that you've had on the show. I mean, where is this thing taking you?
The word hilarious there made me think back to the Steve Elkington interview. And if you've ever heard him talk, he is no filter and he is just a entertainer, man. Like how everyone, I was getting ready to say how every corporation doesn't book him to speak at events blows my mind, but it makes a lot of sense because a lot of it's off color and a lot of stuff that he probably shouldn't say, but the guy can tell a story. And that is some of the stories he told were some of the hardest I remember ever laughing. But yeah, gosh, it's been an unbelievable ride. For me, it's weird. It's not the top young players that I get anxious or nervous to talk about. It's the guys that when I was a kid, like they were the man. Mm-hmm. When I went to Brad Faxon's house and interviewed him, and I was like, this is kind of weird for me. Like he is very far from the most famous person I've interviewed, but I was like, man, I watched you as a kid, and I can't translate the two between like watching this guy inside the ropes and now I get to interview him. So there's just been amazing situations, and getting to interview Tiger Woods was probably the one that really is. It's not the greatest interview ever. We only had him for 12 minutes, and it was kind of in a hype for the first match he played against Phil Mickelson. But I was amazed afterward. I was like, man, you know what? I wasn't nervous, and I didn't play into the role of nervous, and I handled that okay. And for me, that was a big moment. And under some tough circumstances, in like a locker room at Shadow Creek with a bunch of people making a lot of noise. So everything kind of culminating into that. Like, how did we get in this scenario where I get to sit down with the greatest of all time when we were just like some idiots that started this thing in a back room, many, many years ago with no real idea of what we were doing?
Well, you're now an actor, I think, after what we saw yesterday with the commercial. You're a challenger now. What did you think of your commercial debut?
Well, it's so funny that we've garnered at least some of our audience out of saying what's on everyone's mind, which is golf can be hard to watch on TV. There's so many commercials. Oh my God, there's so many commercials. It's something we talk about weekly. And Charles Schwab is a partner of ours, and when you sponsor a tournament, you get a certain allotment of inventory on the broadcast. They use that allotment very well. They do these features. They did a bunch last year on, Mike Kaiser and Bill Core and all these influential people in the game of golf. And then they came back for season 2. They told us they were going to do one on us. And we were just like, oh my God, we have complained about these commercials. And we rip on CBS for their coverage all the time. And they are going to go to commercial on CBS. And we're going to be in one of the commercials. Like, people are going to lose their mind. They're going to call us hypocrites. And that was kind of a little bit of that feeling yesterday. But I wanted to be like, hey, there was going to be something in this spot anyways. We're not taking up anything from the broadcast, but it was super weird to be watching golf, like kind of looking on my computer, and I heard my voice on the screen, and I was like, whoa, oh, it hit a little different. We knew it was coming at a certain time, didn't know when it was going to be. But yeah, it definitely hit a little different to see yourself on TV during a golf broadcast.
Well, I know last week you said you were trying to play in a mini tour event. Where's your golf game at right now? And when you go out to Jack's Beach, what's the competition like between the 5 of you?
So I was really gearing up this spring, I should say, to play. And we were doing a video documentary series on me trying to qualify for the U.S. Open. So the guys took a ton of my responsibilities on, and I was able to play and practice golf 4 to 5 times a week, which I've never done in my entire life. And I got my game in pretty good shape this winter. I won a small event here on the Florida Mid-Am circuit. I had a couple second place finishes. I'd done pretty well. I shot some low scores, shot a career low round, and then U.S. Open qualifying got canceled. So our documentary got canceled. I haven't really been able to justify going out and practicing as much as I would like to, but got kind of a last second offer to play in an event that they kind of just threw together here in Jacksonville, because a bunch of pros came down to play a Monday qualifier for the Korn Ferry event. So they did, for everyone that didn't qualify, they ran an event. Well, I hadn't played a ton, but I got a little practice in going for it, and I just changed driver shafts. I put a lighter shaft in, and I had been smoking this thing, really cutting corners. I hadn't used it in competition yet. I can report I had the full-blown driver yips. If you go play a course in Florida, there's a very good chance that there are houses on the right and houses on the left.
Yes.
So I was aiming at the houses on the right, hoping to keep it in play on the left. And thank God it was so soft out there, because I hit probably 8 to 10 tee shots that finished within 5 yards of the out of bounds boundary on the left. And I couldn't do it. I have no idea what happened. I shot 77, 74, which was a miracle considering how bad I drove it. I did not finish dead last. I finished 3rd to last, which I was very proud of considering how I drove it. And it was really fun to compete with those guys. It wasn't like, hey, I'm really good now, I'm going to go play with the pros. It was, hey, the point was kind of like, hey, how would you compare your game to a pro? And it turns out it's very, very, very different, because somebody shot 60 on the last day to shoot 22 under for 3 days. And a friend of ours shot 65 each day, and he didn't even sniff winning, which is just insane.
So you took a little advice from Club Pro guy. You play for a shot, hope you double cross it, and hope it's in the fairway.
So one of these holes, I hit this hook, and I'm on the left side. Miracle stayed in bounds, and I go to hit a punch out, which, as we know, the Club Pro guy, he led the Mexican Mini Tour in strokes gained punching out sideways, 7 years in a row. I hit a tree on my punch out, and it went OB. And as the ball was in the air, I was like, oh my God, I'm Club Pro guy. I'm like he's gonna lose his mind. I missed your earlier question on what we play when we go out to Jack's Beach. We never have a game that is normal. We do something different every time. We'll switch up teams. We'll do 6, 6, and 6. I've gotten to play enough that my handicap fell a lot, and the guys are kind of lingering in the same handicap space. So I got to give out like 7 or 8 shots to basically each of them on a golf course that doesn't set up great for me. So I lose a lot when we go to Jack's Beach, but I am close to closing out the year-long birdie challenge, which is birdieing every hole. I got 2 more left, and we had 3 months off really, because they had raised cups out there for about 3 months. So I'm hoping to have it done before the halfway point of the year.
I've got 10 at my home course, so we're still working. A couple of holes have me right now; they have my number, but I know I feel the same.
Just play. It's so easy to get in your head like, oh, I haven't birdied this one yet. It's like, no, just play. It'll all work itself out.
I know I feel the same way you do sometimes with guests. So many things to ask, such little time. But I appreciate you coming on and giving us a little bit of your time. Last thing, how is Tron's lefty game?
Honestly, you'd be really impressed. Like, I'm excited to get some videos together on this. He shot a 105 in his first 18-hole round, playing left-handed. He is playing the senior tees, which is one back from the Reds, but it's like I could not break 200, I don't think. And he hit some really, I mean, he hit some bad ones, of course, but he hit some really good ones. He won a skin in the actual Thursday game. He made a birdie on like one of the longer par threes. He might get it into a better position at the top than he does right-handed. It's just going to be a matter of time. It's going to be great to follow. He threw this idea out there. I thought it was the dumbest thing ever. And like 2 weeks into it, I'm like, okay, this makes a ton of sense. I totally see where you're coming from. And he honestly has talent from that side of the ball. So it's going to be fascinating to see how things unfold and how good he gets. If he wants to break 80, that's his goal. That would be legendary if he pulled that off.
He's going to pull out the two drivers, one lefty, one righty, depending on what he needs.
We talked about that. We talked about that actually being a real thing that he potentially would do down the road.
Well, thanks, Chris, for joining us, talking literally everything from golf to Tron's lefty swing. But I appreciate you joining us. Best of luck here. Hopefully golf continues to go smooth sailing. But thanks for your time.
Anytime, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, that was Chris Solomon from No Laying Up Golf Podcast and YouTube page. Like he said, they were just 4 or 5 guys just talking golf, and now they've exploded into this huge thing. They even have a commercial now. So really cool, especially for me as a golf nut, to have Chris on the show, get to pick his brain. So many things I'd like to pick his brain about, but we only had 20 minutes. But Connor, a lot of good guests today. Overall takeaway from Scott feels like the NHL is making progress, but it's still not there yet. And the PGA Tour is there, and they're just hoping it sticks.
I think the NHL is as there as it can be right now. Like if there's one sport, if there's one, team sport that's going to come back, sounds like the NHL has a good plan in place. The only reason why golf is back, and we've talked about this, and Chris kind of hinted at it, is like this social distancing just naturally makes sense because it's golf. So, I don't think I'm surprised to see that golf is the first thing back. But again, like we said off the top today, these are two sports that I think, obviously golf is already back, but these are the two sports you're looking at this summer at this point, with baseball being in dire straits with, the disagreement between the players and the owners. But also the NBA looks a whole lot less certain than it did, at this time a week ago. So, I think hockey, the only reason why you don't see hockey back is because, and why you see golf back is because there are just so many logistical things that hockey has to deal with that golf just doesn't.
There's the international factor of golf, but basically golf has enough people stateside because it has a lot of international players, but a majority of those international players have homes here in the States, and they stayed here. And that's why you see Rory McIlroy and John Rahm and these guys who are not from the United States, but they have homes in Florida or Texas or California, and they're able to come to these tournaments. Last thing that could impact the late summer sports schedule, obviously college football is attempting to come back. They have not announced anything as in delays. It's just basically, look, you can report starting June 1st, start your voluntary activities. Indiana starts theirs today. We saw some tweets. Matthew Bedford sent out a tweet today with a picture of the stadium. Sio Nafunga Totoa, one of my favorite names to say, which I think I have down now. He tweeted, time to get to work. These guys are excited to get back. The only issue, we just saw it over the weekend with Houston. The University of Houston has shut down their football program for the time being because of 6 COVID-19 positive cases within the football team. Alabama also had several cases. So this feels like something that isn't going to go away, and it feels tougher and tougher to get a football season. You have to think the NFL is looking at this as well.
Absolutely. I think the NFL happens before college football does, just because it's easier to get one league on one, page of the same book.
Yeah, there's only 32 teams compared to
Exactly.
130.
The question that we will start asking ourselves as we get into, the middle of the summer here is whether or not college football will happen in some capacity and whether or not it will be able to happen without every Division I college football team playing, because you see these individualized cases with Alabama and now Houston where, they are taking individual liberties and, an individual opportunity to make specific changes to their program. Whereas, the NCAA might be speaking a completely different language right now.
Well,
So
they've basically passed all the authority or the judgment to the conferences. Said, look, you guys get to figure it out. College football will not go without Alabama. It will not. Without Houston, yeah, it can go. But it cannot go without Alabama. So if there are issues in Tuscaloosa, there is no chance that college football happens. That's just the reality of it.
I completely agree. We'll have to see. I think, sooner or later, we're going to have to answer some questions about, all these conferences being on the same page or not, because, could we see a college football season without Pac-12? Like,
It's just like in the NBA. Like, if LeBron James gets a positive test for COVID-19 after game 3 of the finals, what do? You can't keep going without LeBron James. Like, it is going to be so crazy. Like, Alabama gets players test positive. You can't have a college football season without Alabama. If Rory McIlroy tests positive for COVID-19, how does the PGA Tour respond with its number one player and number one marketable player out with COVID-19?
Yeah.
That's the type of stuff I'm very curious to see because, yeah, if somebody on the Jacksonville Jaguars gets COVID-19, they can quarantine them, and I guarantee you the NFL attempts to keep moving. But if Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady gets it, what the heck does the NFL do at that point?
It's the question. Yeah, it's the question of whether or not at a certain point is some sports better than no sports, even if that means not having your top stars. It's the same reality of people trying to schedule weddings right now. Is it better to postpone it 12 months because you'll be able to do whatever you were planning on doing originally without, having any worries? Very interesting on certain times, but, as we've been talking about, we're inching closer. And this last weekend, man, did I love watching live sports on TV again. That was momentous.
I let out audible cheers and groans and oh no's and yays and just watching a golf event. It was great to have the drama of a live sporting event.
It's never been so great to hear Jim Nance's voice.
Oh, it was so nice to have something that I didn't know how it was going to end, basically.
Yep.
So we do know how this show is going to end. It's going to end at noon, which is basically right now. But we want to thank Chris Solomon and Scott Powers for coming on today, talking hockey, talking golf, two sports that we haven't talked as much about here in our podcast. But we have some great guests coming up. I'm not going to say them just in case they do end up needing – they're busy people. They might need their schedules changed. But we do, I promise, have some great guests lined up for you this summer. We're continuing to increase our span and our footprint, and a lot of great people agreeing to come on our show, which is we're extremely blessed to have that. So thanks to Connor for co-hosting with me today. We'll have Griffin Gonzalez with me on Wednesday. Same time, we'll try and get the YouTube live feed going. We apologize for those who enjoy watching us live. It did not work this morning, but we will attempt to get that going. But again, you can get our podcast anywhere that you get podcasts: Spreaker Podcast, Spotify Podcast, Apple Podcast, wherever you want to get us, we are there. We're also video on our YouTube page at IU Sports Media. For Connor, Scott, and Chris, I'm Austin Render saying so long from Unpaid Interns.